Ukraine says Russian shelling has killed 3 people and wounded nearly 20 others in its second largest city, Kharkiv. Russian missiles also destroyed a school in the city of Kramatorsk in the eastern Donbas region. Meanwhile, Kyiv is training soldiers to use new longer-range weapons arriving from the west, which Russia claims is forcing it to widen its offensive.
This is all that remains of a school in the Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk. Russian missiles destroyed this building and several homes nearby. The number of casualties was not immediately known, as rescuers dug through the rubble in search of people possibly trapped inside. Amid relentless Russian shelling, regional officials in eastern and southern Ukraine have been urging civilians to evacuate. But that is not an easy option for the elderly or frail.
I could not believe it. But when we were under the rubble, the will to live was there after all. So we dug ourselves out with our hands. What else could we do?
Elsewhere in Ukraine, the military is training its soldiers to use new weapons currently arriving from the west. Kyiv hopes that the new anti-tank rocket launchers and mortars will change the tide of the war in their favor. Earlier, Washington announced it was sending even more longer-range arms to Ukraine. Russia has criticized the West, saying Moscow has no choice but to expand its war aims in Ukraine.
As the West pours more and more long-range weapons, such as HIMARS, into Ukraine in an impotent rage, or in a desire to exacerbate the situation as much as possible. That means the geographical tasks of the special operation will extend still further from the current line.
But in an interview with DW, Germany's Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock dismissed Russia's argument that it's being forced to widen its offensive in Ukraine because of Western weapons deliveries.
Russia is using every time a different argument, so this time it's because of the military support they are saying, but they have been attacking Kiev and other parts of Ukraine before, so it's just a new propaganda from the Russian side.
Meanwhile, Russian forces continue to hit civilian targets, not only on the front lines, but in cities and towns throughout Ukraine.
And for more on this, I'm joined now by military analyst Mike Martin. He's a fellow at the Department of War Studies at King's College in London. Welcome. Just yesterday, Russia announced expanded goals, and already today we're seeing more brutal attacks. What do you think this will mean going forward?
I think, as you mentioned in your package, this is just more Russian propaganda. Throughout the war since February, they've been trying to decapitate the government. They're focusing on the east, they're focusing on the south, back to the east. In reality, what's been happening is, over the last 2 or 3 months, they've been focusing on their offensive in Donbas, whilst the Ukrainians have been taking lots of territory in the south around Kherson. And that's caused the Russians to have to stall their offensive in Donbas and start to focus on the south because they're losing lots of territory there.
The West says it'll challenge any annexations and send more heavy weapons. And some very vocal critics say that that'll only drag out a war they believe Ukraine is bound to lose sooner or later. Where do you stand on that?
I think if you assume that Ukraine's going to lose the war and don't send weapons, then Ukraine is going to lose the war. I think, actually, if you look at the fundamentals, Ukraine is fighting on its home territory. Its morale is sky high, and they're fighting for their own survival. Russia's fighting a war of choice with poorly trained conscripts. And overall, I think Ukraine can win this war if they're given the appropriate weaponry to do so.
What do you think about the much talked about war fatigue in the West?
I think that's significant. I think we're entering a period now where we have 3 or 4 months before winter. Obviously, winter is when things start to change because then Russia has some levers over Europe, particularly Germany, in terms of gas supply. So there is a bit of a real problem where Ukraine needs to make some progress over the next 3 or 4 months, or rather, it needs to continue to make progress over the next 3 or 4 months, so that the weapons that the West is supplying are seen to be effective or continue to be seen to be effective. I think that if they don't show or continue to show progress before, say, October or November when it starts to get cold, then we may see problems over the winter in terms of this Western fatigue that you're talking about.
Russia says peace is possible, but on their terms that are unclear but certainly unacceptable to Ukraine. What conditions do you think need to be created to find a negotiated solution to this gruesome conflict?
Well, I think for the Ukrainians, they only have one demand here, which is that Russia leaves their sovereign territory. And I can see their point, because previously in 2014, when Russia was not put back in its box, effectively the annexations of Crimea, the territorial gains in the Donbas were allowed to go past. What happened? Russia came and had another go. So I think from the Ukrainian point of view, anything short of a complete Russian withdrawal from Ukrainian territory will see them continue fighting.
Military analyst Mike Martin, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.